Just getting all set up, making sure the audio is good, and doing some tests. Just realized my mic was still unmuted even though you couldn't see me. You guys can still hear me, right? My audio's good. You don't have to like blast your side in order to hear me. I remember there's a time when I was for one of my clients, and you know, the people, the C-level or managers or whatever that come in and out of the office, and they just come in and say, hey, we need you to do this and this, and all of a sudden do this. There's like no documentation or anything. They just come in and say, here's stuff we need you to do. And this was, I don't know, 2011 or something like that. And so I'm looking up at him. I'm doing this while he's talking. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm writing down everything you're saying. So yeah, a lot of people know this about me, but I type 120 words a minute if I'm going slow, up to like 190 words a minute. So I'm sitting there just typing all the stuff he's saying. It's very distracting, obviously, but part of the goal was you shouldn't be coming in here doing this. I mean, documentation is more important, so I'm like, even if you don't type quickly, next time a manager comes into your office, just start pounding away like that. Probably should have gotten some water. About to be doing some talking. All right, close this, close this. think close this. Where did my thing go? About to get started here. Okay. Oh, when it's on camera mode, you can't see the chat. Let's stick that inside here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started now. This is episode number 2 of Do What I Do. And the Do What I Do, in case you guys didn't see episode 1, whoever happens to be here right now, Do What I Do is about, I'm going to write some code, me or possibly some other guild member or a Gin Studios member. And yeah, there's a code of conduct. That is a very important thing to say here. Do What I Do is someone in the guild or Gin Studios is going to do some sort of code in a production mentality. And we're going to do it like not a hello world, not something that's like, oh, here's a cool little code snippet you can use, or here's a cool framework we're just going to demo for you. We're going to be writing code as if this is going to a client, to a production, with a production mentality. And so Do What I Do, most importantly, it's focusing on software engineering. It's not focusing on IT infrastructure, QA, design, stuff like that. So that's the short story. Go check out the other stuff, the other episodes, if you want to see more details about that sort of stuff. There's rules to it, and the end goal here is that people watching this now or in the future, even if it's 10 years from now or whatever the case is, should be submitting their example of how they do it. This is the way I do it. I want you to do what I do, but in this case, it's a C# Web API, so maybe in Node or maybe in Java or in something else that is like do the same exact thing, and then let's compare notes. Let's see if I were doing this in Java, if I were to go watch your video, now I can say, oh, see, I know how to do it in C#. I didn't understand how these things relate to Java or Node.js or whatever the case is. And I understand how my principles now, not just, coding some stuff, but following these production mentality software engineering principles, how they now apply to Java, how I would open up Eclipse or something like that and do all the stuff in Eclipse and get it done in Java. I'm not a Java person, so I don't know. I really want someone to do this in Java and show me how they do the same exact thing I'm about to do in Java. So we've got this linked board right here. Let me go ahead and stick it in this chat, even though it's in the meetup. DWID needs a theme. It does need a theme song because we have an opening for DWID, but there's no song to it or anything like that. So yeah, so here's the DWID storyboard. And last time we did task 2. We skipped task 1. There's some design. Like I said, we're not doing design stuff. So now we're going to do task 3, and that is API development. So this story, as a reminder, says I want to be able to view fruits with their calories. So I mean, there's other details here in the story. There's as a and so that, which is business use cases and sort of authentication or like the end user. But they want to be able to view fruits with their calories. So last time we did the UI and we mocked out the fruits and calories and made it sortable on the UI. This time we're doing this task which says implement an API that can get a collection, and it's even specifically putting get because it's going to be an HTTP API call. Get a collection of all the fruits, including their name and calories per serving. And in this task, we're not making it sortable. This task is just saying get all those because it's already sortable on the front end, and maybe in the future, if this were to grow to millions, we wouldn't want to return millions to the front end. We want to say, okay, now let's go ahead and shift this sorting to the back end or something like that. But we've got this task here, and it says implement an API that can get a collection of the fruits. Hum your theme song. The only song that I think to hum whenever I think of it is dun 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 dun, which is Legend of Zelda, if you don't happen to know that. Okay, so as a software engineer who comes at this task, this is story number 1, task number 3. And this is the first time we're ever doing an API. So as a software engineer, there's a lot of things that go through my head, or at least it's a software architect. There's a lot of things that go through my head. We're going to need a lot of cross-cutting concerns. And Floyd actually did a video on cross-cutting concerns, which goes through some of the processes and some of the ideas of cross-cutting concerns. So definitely go check that video out. And it's on Gin Studios, and it's also on Techlahoma. So cross-cutting concerns that come to my head, logging is one of them, authentication is one of them, authentication and authorization. That's what I call orizentic, because it's auth and isation at the end, but the only difference is the or is or the entic in the middle. So authorization, authentication. Anyway, that's just what I call it. So there's API gateways, there's logging, telemetry tracing, documentation, message queuing. There's all these things that are going to happen across all of our stuff. I'm not going to implement all of that stuff right now because we don't need that at the moment. This is just an API that's going to be returning some hard-coded fruits essentially. But there are some thoughts that I want to put into this sort of stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get started. So I'm going to open up this fruit folder I have right here. I sort of showed a little bit of this last time, but I'm going to start off with git init. So this is a brand new project. First thing you want to start off is have source control. This is just local source control, but there we go, we've got this. While I'm here, you can do this in Visual Studio too, what I'm about to do, but it's just clicking. There's clicking to go through menus instead of typing stuff. So I'm going to say .NET new solution. I need to be in the right folder. How's that sound for an idea? Bam, cd, bam, bam, .NET new solution. All right, so we've got a fruit solution, and a solution, if you don't know, just looks like this. It's just a text file. It just looks like this. It just says it's a solution. It can run in Visual Studio 16, and that's pretty much it. Until you start adding things to the solution, that's essentially what a solution is. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a C# project inside of here. So it's going to be .NET new. It's going to be a web project because this is going to be an API, and web is it's very empty. It's a very empty API template. There's not much to it. So that's definitely what I want to start with because I'm doing this. I'm not doing a hello world where it's like build me out the weather forecast or whatever the case is. I don't need a hello world application. So I'm going to say fruit.api. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything except for the program.cs and the project file, just because, like I said, I'm going bare bones here. Oh, is the solution format going to change, Rainer? I don't know. It's not something that you should do. You shouldn't go in there and alter it manually very much. But I do alter it manually every once in a while, and I might show you why at some point. I don't think I'm going to get into it this time, but there's a little bit of some changes that I make every once in a while. Okay, so I've got a project here, but the project's not added to the solution. And in Visual Studio, you can just right-click the solution, say Add Existing Project, and point to it. Or you can say .NET solution add fruit.api. What that really does is it says add this folder, and you could specify the CS project, but there's only one in there, so you should be able to do that. I'm halfway guessing at this. Rainer's in here, and he works on the .NET team at Microsoft, so you could be like, that's not what it does. Something like that, though. I'm getting as close as I can, just based on using the .NET API. Okay, so I have an empty solution with an empty CS project. This is just setting up a project. It's not obviously not doing anything exactly yet, but what I'm going to do over here is let's say empty solution. Oh, I've gotten a new computer since that last time that I did that. So let's say, I don't want you guys to be worried about this anyway. Last time we were doing stuff in HTML and CSS, goes all, and this time we're doing things in Visual Studio, so might as well use the Visual Studio tools that come with this. Bam, bam, bam. Okay. Oh, you know what else I like to do? I'm gonna go off to the side over here and do something else. That was just the same folder. Whenever you create a Git repository, your system, Git or Bitbucket or wherever it is, asks you, do you want to add a git ignore file? And I always say no, because they're sometimes like language specific, and there's all kinds of different things. And I've just sort of gotten used to using my own git ignore file essentially. So let me just come in here and where's that folder? That's not it. folder. Let's go paste this git ignore in here. All right, so now there's a lot less things to check in here. So I'm just going to start using the Visual Studio Git instead. I'm going to say this will check in empty solution. Just kidding. Cool. All right, so I've got a Fruit API, and it has just these services and dependencies, and these are just auto-added things that are in Visual Studio. It's not actual files or anything like that. This is an actual file, launchsettings.json, and this is an actual file, the program. But I want to show you guys the CS proj. I'm sure that works also a lot with .NET stuff, but my git ignore also has like HTML stuff in it. Just so I use the same one always. It's got the HTML and JavaScript for like the node modules and everything. I just copy paste it across all the things. But you're right that may be overboard in some cases. So I'm going to say, I'm going to point out that if you were to run a console application, I forget what it is right here exactly. It's like startup type or something like that. It would say exe. And the CS project is almost exactly the same for a class library, a console application, or web application, except that the web application has this .web on here. And what that does is it adds a lot of the web API, ASP.NET framework utilities to be automatically built in without having to use NuGet packages. You could omit this and manually put a bunch of NuGet packages in here to solve those framework requirements, but I don't think. But it's less common to do that unless you're abstracting a lot of this away into your own NuGet package. You actually can't build this into a NuGet package. As far as I know, you can't build this into a NuGet package. So you have to instead take dependencies on the NuGet packages at that point. So I've got this in here. I'm going to add a line here. I don't know exactly. And I'm also going to change the formatting. I don't know why when they started off, it's 2 spaces, and then any change you make automatically changes it to 4 spaces. That's really weird to me. But I essentially am saying treat warnings as errors because this is a new project. If you're going to an old project, you don't want to put this in there. Definitely don't want to put this in there. Probably don't even want to put this in there, nullable enable. But treat warnings as errors will help you solve a lot of problems from the ground up. You should never have any errors or warnings, and rarely a message, if at all. So yeah, treat warnings as errors is the main thing I'm going to be adding into here. So we have a project. It just says we're using .NET 6. We have a program.cs, and this is a very thin program.cs, but we're going to do something in here. We're gonna keep it thin for round 1 here. API/fruits. We're going to say if somebody goes to API/fruits, then they will get back a new list of fruits. But we don't have fruit, so let's say bullet record fruit DTO, and I'm going to get a couple of properties in here. I'm not going to be 100% coding live, but pretty close. So fruit DTO, it's got a couple properties. If you remember last episode, pretty much name and calories is all we're talking about right now for our user story requirements. So we've got this fruit DTO. I'm going to move this into its own file. Just, why did I put spaces at the top? That's really weird. Move it into its own file, and I'm going to say, let's return a couple of the fruits, which are I didn't try to copy paste them from the front end video, but this is pretty much the same thing. Kiwi, apple, banana. We got some calories in here, and we can run it. So what's happening here is we're saying create a builder, and it just builds a web application. It's built in. This isn't anything I did. It's built in. So we're saying build it as a web application, and we're saying we're going to map get, which is the get HTTP verb, map get with this route. So if they go to our website /API/fruits, then it will get and it will return this stuff. After we define all the stuff we want, we just say app.run, and this will just run indefinitely. And I'm going to make one more change real quick. Okay, I just want to change these ports because I've been doing some testing. This isn't completely live, and I liked these ports that it was on. Okay, so what this says is, thanks Nick. Nick in YouTube commenting. So what this is saying is essentially there's profiles. You have IIS profiles. You have profiles for whatever systems you're going to be running in. This is just a basic fruit.api profile. It's spinning up that the environment is development, and this would be overridden, of course, whenever you're pushing to different environments. And this is saying that for this profile, which is just going to be spinning up here in localhost and IIS Express, that it's going to run on these ports. So let me close this. Let me just hit go. Oh, there's another change I wanted to do too. I'm not a fan of when something starts up, it opens a page, and then if you happen to exit out, like you're doing other things, for example, and like, oh, I don't need this anymore, I'm going to close it. Then it closes all the things. It didn't do it this time. Okay, if you were to stop it, if you were to hit stop debugging, then it would close the whole window, and then all of your history is gone, all the tabs you had open. So I typically say don't launch a browser. Let me just go ahead and manually do it. So I run it. Now it's just running. It didn't launch a browser, but I can come over here, refresh, and you can see that it's getting back these fruits, kiwi, apple, banana, with the things. This is it. This is all you need to do for a microservice, for a web service in .NET. It's very simple, very straightforward. I went through a lot of other things, obviously, but like I said earlier, the first thing that comes to my mind is cross-cutting concerns as a software architect. I could just do this, and this could be the end of it. Nothing about this data, nothing about this task says we need to allow somebody to add fruits, like an admin, for example, to say, oh, add a fruit or fix the calories. Calories is wrong, update calories. We're not doing any of that CRUD stuff. And I always say until you have two pieces of the CRUD stuff, you don't really need to go all the way back to the database per se, at least not in the testing phase. So right now we're just reading. Once we need to write something and make alterations and have data persisting that can be altered and everything like that, then we're going to go back to the database. But that's not here for this task. But I am going to start thinking about some cross-cutting concerns. So let me get my notes open over here. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to change this because as you evolve in .NET, as you evolve, you don't want to just sit here single file in your program.cs and just be putting everything single file. You want to start adding structure so that you can do dependency injection and also so it's more readable to any developer. If you're brand new to C#, this is like, I would say it's closer to a scripting language because you don't have to do namespacing and classes and everything like that. It is happening behind the scenes. They're taking this and they're putting it into a program class and with a main method. But let me go ahead and do that. So I'm going to say namespace fruit UI.api. And then I'm going to say public static class program. And I'm going to say static void main string array args. Cool. Now we have an application and we can essentially do something like this. I should have probably stopped it. Or I could have hot reloaded it. That doesn't really matter right now. Same thing. So the same thing's happening. I've just taken out the automatic stuff that's happening and put it into this type of style. Let me see here. So now what I'm going to do is instead of doing this map get, I'm going to go ahead and create a controller. So add a new folder, controllers, Alt-Shift-C. I'm going to call it a fruit controller. All right, we've got a fruit controller. So in order to make this an actual controller, something that Microsoft ASP.NET is going to pick up, you just need to inherit from controller base. And now it says, oh, there's a controller. So it uses a reflection. It goes through your application or the assembly that you give it. You can give it an assembly name to look for these things. Otherwise, it's just the start of assembly. And it says, let's find all the controllers in here. And then these are the controllers that we're going to register with routes in order for people to go ahead and use them. And in here, I'm going to have fruit, DTO, get fruits. I'm going to have this with a route on it. So this is saying, once again, it's going to be a get. Here's the route. And so instead of doing that here, it's a get. Here's the route. I'm going to say it's a get. Here's the route. It has a method name. Return this. Did I get that right? Heck, looks good to me. All right. So it's the same thing, except I've made some file structure here, and this becomes way more simplified. So now this program.cs is really just configuring our application. It's not actually defining endpoints or doing any business logic or database stuff or anything like that. It's just starting up the application and defining those types of things. A couple more things I'm going to put in here. I'm going to say use HTTPS redirection. Generally speaking, we want HTTPS instead of just HTTP. And also, now that I've moved that out of here, instead of defining the get directly on the app, I have to tell it map controllers. I have to say, go find all the controllers in this application. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I've changed this to file per module, or module per file, class per file. Put a little bit of structure around it because we're going to start getting a little bit more complicated. But there we go. I should be able to run it exactly as before. That's because the builder needs to say add controllers. So the builder is the thing that goes around and finds the controllers, and then map controllers is going to find all the routes on those controllers and map them to the routes. All right, same exact thing. I'm refreshing. Of course, it's giving the same exact thing. I haven't changed anything here. All right, so this, let me see here. Get changes. Okay, so I've created a super basic, with no cross-cutting concerns, I've created a super basic API here. So let's go ahead and commit those things. Commit frequently. Constantly be committing. So we have, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out here right now. API, the reason we start with API is because it's an API endpoint, and also because it's the default API endpoint. So if I were to later on completely change the implementation of this, maybe in a different class or whatever the case is, I would actually change the original one to V1, and maybe even change the name to V1. And then this would be the new one. So new get fruits out, it doesn't really matter. Oh, it says new get. That's hilarious. And what happens is if people are taking a dependency on API/fruits, they will always have the latest. They don't have to worry about versioning their stuff or whatever the case is. But if there's a breaking change happening and we tell our clients or whoever our consumers of these endpoints, hey, there's going to end up being a change coming up pretty soon, and it's going to have these requirements or have these changes to the model renames or something like that to the fields. If you don't want to break prior to us updating that here in 2 weeks or whatever the case is, go ahead and take a dependency on the current version, which is V1, and it won't change for you. But if you get updated before then or whatever, then you don't have to worry about it. Just keep API. If this message doesn't bother you, just ignore us and just keep hitting API, and they'll always have the latest. So this is my mentality. I'm not saying that everyone works this way, but this is one of the ways that I do things here. So API/fruits. No changes. Okay. All right, so let's start thinking about some cross-cutting concerns, though, because this isn't just get something done really cool and is really fast in software or basic programming or hello world programming. We're going to update ourselves to do a little bit of documentation, some Swagger documentation. So what we need to do is tell our startup application that we're going to be taking a dependency on Swagger. Well, one of the first things we need to do is let's do So I have swashbuckle.asp.NET Core, ASP.NET Core here, and what this is Swagger. So this has all the packages that you need for Swagger to have open API documentation, or you could have come into NuGet and said install swashbuckle ASP.NET Core, or even by command line said NuGet install swashbuckle.asp.NET Core. I already had it, so I just copy pasted it into here, so it's the same exact everything. Okay, cool. So I've got Swashbuckle installed for Swagger, and I'm going to say add controllers. So for our builder, not just add controllers, but add Swagger generation. And I've got app.build. I'm going to say if our environment is development, which we're running here, and we've got this environment set to development, so that's that's exactly what it is. Then we're going to say use Swagger, and then we're also going to say use Swagger UI, because Swagger can create JSON documentation and everything like that. But the Swagger UI is the thing that says that creates an automatic web page for people to be able to view the documentation, so you don't have to make your own web page. And I think that's all off the top of my head. Let me just double check some things here. So we're running. We go to /Swagger. We're zoomed in a lot. All right, Swagger. It's amazing. It works. So what it's going to do is it's going to document all of our endpoints. Right now we have this fruits endpoint. And it will also say, here's an example of what we'll return. It'll return a fruit ID that's an integer, a name that's a string, and some calories that's an integer. It says it'll return text/plain. That doesn't worry me. I don't always have to put in documentation to tell people it's going to return JSON, because that's just a Swagger thing. We're not telling Swagger it returns JSON, even though the framework will return JSON. But yeah, that's the case right here. We can even say try it out. So we're going to hit execute, and it's going to execute that exact endpoint. There's no parameters we have to input because it's just a get with no parameters, and look at that. It works perfectly fine. Here's the JSON that gets returned. Much prettier than this. Yeah, it's formatted. It's pretty nice. All right, so we've got some Swagger. That was not too complicated. Commit. We'll commit some Swagger. Do you commit Swagger? Yeah, I do. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is logging. Every application, one of the things you have to do from the beginning, it's not like, oh, if we ever need it in the future. Development's going to be ongoing on this. We're going to start getting more and more complex, and the more complex we get, we're going to want to be able to do some debugging, and either way, we're going to want logging, because if this is an enterprise application, we're going to need the cross-cutting concern of logging. So with logging, we're going to make a couple of changes here. Let's see here. One of the things that I'm going to do to start off with is I'm going to extract some of these parts, because one of the parts we're doing builders, and some other parts we're doing the app, some Swagger stuff, and we're about to add logging in here. So I'm going to say instead, I'm just going to copy paste this and I'll explain it instead. How does that sound? Because we don't want to do live programming the whole way through. Oh yeah, we're doing logging. So what we're going to be using for logging is Serolog and some application insights. So what we're going to do is come in here and do some Serolog and application insights. So what we got here is application insights. We've got Serolog for ASP.NET Core. And I also have logging for a file in here. There's some logging implementation and some later on some auth implementation here in a couple minutes I'm going to do that is just starting auth implementation and logging implementation. And then later on we're going to get into abstracting these cross-cutting concerns out into their own NuGet packages so that multiple things can use them, and also upgrading them to use instead of sort of temporary logging and temporary authentication, to use the more hardcore stuff, the more enterprise level stuff. So we still got the swashbuckle. We don't need this in here for auth yet. I don't want to check it in, but it will be there. We got Serolog and we've got application insights. That's the main couple of things. So we're going to use Serolog, Serolog, application insights. Let me see here. Open up this. Open up this. Got some middlewares. Models. Service. Okay. I'll go through this one bit at a time here. All right, so what I've changed is instead of the multiple lines, I've cut it down to configuring the builder. The builder is passed to the app, so it can configure the app, and the app says .run. So if you remember previously, it was configuring the builder, it was creating the app, it was doing some things, and it's called app.run. So that's the same thing that's happening right now, except for in one line. And so configure builder is the first thing that's going to get called. Builder is going to do the same thing where it creates the builder, it adds the controllers, it adds SwaggerGen. I don't think we want to configure Swagger. Yeah, we'll configure Swagger a little bit more complex. Now, because that's going to get into something else. Hold on 1 second. There's part of your problem right there. Even copy pasting has programming live issues. Okay, do this, do this. Okay, so it's going to create the builder, add controllers, add SwaggerGen, and then configure logging. Then after it configures logging, it'll do configure app. Configure app still says, nothing's changed here, app is going to build the builder to create the app. If it's development, use Swagger UI, HTTP, S redirection, map controllers, app. So the only thing that's really changed here is that we've added configure logging. And configure logging, I'm going to have my own custom telemetry channel here. So let me go over here and open folder, bam, bam, go over here, fruit API, bam, bam. Hey, it just works. I don't want to go through this this custom logging telemetry stuff too much because it could literally be anything. You could be just writing to a file. You could do anything you want. But what I have set up here is it just takes any telemetry that comes from application insights. It splits it up into different types: request telemetry, trace telemetry, exception telemetry, and it adds them to these different objects, and it flushes these objects. It deletes old ones. It does all this sort of stuff. And then whenever someone calls read telemetry, they should be able to read the telemetry. We're going to use this a little bit to show some telemetry, but we're not going to. This is just a naive initial implementation. And this is what happens in production also. You're going to create mocked out initial implementations until you create an architecture task or something for somebody to abstract these things and go work on those on the side much more in depth. Let me check out the chat. Okay, nothing going on in the chat yet. Okay, so we've got that. So program.cs just says we're going to create a Serolog logger. We're going to read from configuration. There's nothing going on in configuration right now, but if there was, then it'd be there. I could delete this. I'm just keep it in there because it's just common standard. We're going to enrich from the log context. So the log context is in application insights or in any APM, you have usually something like starting a scope, for example. So you've got scopes of different levels of logging, and those scopes add a little bit of extra information for where you are in the scope. And this is saying add log context from log context for Serolog. But this will also go into play for pulling stuff from application insights. We're going to write to file, just because I want to write to file. And we have this output template. And the output template, the main thing to look at this, you can make the template anything you want. And Serolog has all kinds of documentation for how their timestamp works, levels, messages, and stuff like that. The main thing is properties. These properties are the things, it's going to make sure that whenever it logs your data, it's going to pull in the properties, including the scopes and all that other detail are going to be here inside these properties. Create logger, just another Serolog call to finish creating the logger. And then with that, we're going to say add Serolog with that logger. We're going to say clear providers because we don't want anything that's the default hello world stuff. We're going to say add Serolog with the logger. And we're going to say application insights. We want everything in general to log information above. and Microsoft stuff, which is any of the built-in ASP.NET framework logging and things like that. If it's an error, then log it. We don't want a bunch of trace information. Not right now. I mean, you can configure this to say we want to see trace information, but by default, we want it to be error, based on error. So telemetry channel, we've got a custom telemetry channel. Add a singleton for that iTelemetry channel. iTelemetry channel is for any type of telemetry, which is we're using application insights. We're saying we want the telemetry to go through this telemetry channel. And we're also saying if anything asks for custom telemetry channel, which has the read method I was talking about. So if someone wants to read that telemetry channel, then give them back the same thing. And it's a singleton, so it'll be exactly the same object if anyone asks for it. Add application insights telemetry. So this method is the only thing really new here, is putting in this information. I shouldn't have to go into my fruit controller to change anything to get this information, but I can add some custom logging if I want to. So CTOR, create a custom constructor. I want a logger. You don't need this here. I frequently do this. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So I could say logger dot log information. We made it. Okay, so let's see if I've gotten all my bases covered here. And if I run this, oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to run this. I'm going to refresh this. Okay, I still get fruits. I'm going to say, execute this. Okay, we got that. Okay, so this endpoint, part of that stuff that I just did, add an endpoint that is ignored. It uses Swagger to ignore the endpoint, but it is just called API/get telemetry. No, just telemetry. There it goes. Look at that, all that logging here, and it should have, we made it, yeah. So it logged we made it because I refreshed that a bunch of times. So yeah, we made it, we made it, we made it. Whole bunch of logging, so yay, logging works. With some custom application insights and Swagger implementation. Now, if you're in Azure, there's some automatic application insight stuff that automatically hooks into your application, and I took some of that out in here because I'm not in Azure, and so I don't need that integration stuff. But this is a perfectly good some custom telemetry. What did I change here? So here I added a constructor with some logging, added some logging for the program. I refactored a lot of it, but I added this logging method is the main thing that we added here. So let's say added telemetry logging and telemetry/logging. Cool. All right, we've got logging. Whew, fun times. So the next thing is authentication. The reason why I'm thinking about authentication right now is because at some point, sometimes at some point, you have the desire to not just have is development here. You could have the desire to say, if somebody is authorized, if somebody can authenticate and they're authorized to use our API, then we're going to say they can go ahead and check out our Swagger as the document, as the form of documentation. You don't just want to do this, because then your documentation is just open to the world, and it just gives them one less thing that they have to do in order to take advantage of any weaknesses they might find, or whatever the case is. But if they have the authorization to be using your API anyway to begin with, then you want to essentially have them be able to do that. Allow them to be able to use that as the documentation channel. That's not getting rid of your responsibilities. Just like I did here, which I didn't show, but I'm ignoring this. I'm not documenting this API endpoint for, or this one, for get telemetry data. It's not something that they need to be able to see. They don't need to see that that's there. Of course, if they figure it out, they could probably go there and see it. But I could also lock that down with authorization so that only people authorized to see that can see it. Anyway, so there's all kinds of responsibilities that you have for yourself there. But I've got I have a new cross-cutting concern that I'm going to put in here for authentication authorization. So in order to do that, I'm going to minimize this, open up this. I'm going to avoid doing things live 100%. I am going to need that new, for JWT. We're going to be using JWT for this basic authentication. So I'm going to add a NuGet dependency on identity model tokens JWT. I don't know what I just did. Oh, I did undo. Save, go, bam. Okay. All right, so let's see what we've changed here just by doing this. Okay, so now when we add Swagger Gen, we're going to configure Swagger. It's not just going to be just add Swagger. We're going to do a little bit of extra configuration here to make sure that we need to do some authentication in order to use Swagger. And we're also going to say we're going to add an Auth Service, which I will show that part here in a minute. So we're going to need to do dependency injection for the Auth Service because some of the middlewares that we use and some of the services are going to need access to this Auth Service. So we're going to be doing dependency injection. We're going to be using a new middleware for Swagger, and I'm just going to call it Swagger middleware. And then we're going to be using a new middleware for our JWT, our authorization. I just call it JWT middleware. So a little bit of configuration stuff, but the main thing is this configure Swagger, which is, like I said, I was calling from up here, configure Swagger. And so let's just go ahead and jump back over here. What we're doing is we're telling Swagger we have a new security definition. And what that's going to do, I'll show you here in a second, is it's going to add something to the Swagger page that allows them to input some security information. And in this case, we're going to be using a bearer token. So we're going to say for any time that you want to call one of these APIs on Swagger, use this bearer token. That way, whenever you use that execute to try, you can try this API endpoint and execute it. If that thing needs, well, it'll add it to every single one, I believe. But it'll add that bearer token that you tell it for this security definition. It will add that to every single call from then on so that all of those test calls are authorized. And then we have add security requirement, which just, I guess I'm not positive on how these two things work together. I know this adds the thing to the UI, and this probably tells it use the bearer token or something like that. You can probably find documentation for this in a lot of places. It's just common. This is some extra stuff that I'm going to do for Swagger. This is saying we're going to include some additional documentation for Swagger. So any of the stuff that we have here that generates XML documentation, we're going to say use that XML documentation for here. And in order to do that, we're going to have to say generate XML documentation. So in our project, we're going to say generate documentation file true. And we're going to say don't warn everywhere throughout the whole entire project if something doesn't happen to be documented. This is an API project. If this was an SDK that we're publishing to NuGet, then we're going to want to have documentation on a lot, if not all, but most of the endpoints, the properties, and things like that. A lot of that stuff will have documentation, give or take, depending on your level of requirements. But for an API especially, you don't just have to say document every single thing everywhere. So we're going to say don't warn us about every single thing. We'll document what we think is necessary. Okay, so let's go ahead and, now that I've sort of explained what we're going to do to configure Swagger to require this authentication, we're going to implement these two middlewares and this Auth Service. So let me do this. Yes, yes, yes. Ta-da. It's amazing. It's amazing how fast I am at programming. Oh, that's fine. Add existing project, fruit, API, yes. All right. changes here. I know you guys don't want to see me program live too much. So there we go. Okay, so we're back to where we were. We've got that information right there. Let's go ahead and close that. Go ahead and close that. Go ahead and close that. So what I've added here is some middleware. We're going to come to this this JWT middleware. So what this is saying is that whenever a call comes through, we have a middleware that we've registered with our program.cs. We're saying use this middleware, and what that does is it sets somewhere you can control what order your middleware go in. It's not complete. It's not like it randomizes it every time. But you can't really rely on it unless you specifically tell it use this version, then this version, this version. Anyway, we're saying at some point between when the request comes in and before it gets to our endpoint, our API endpoint, which is the fruit controller here, we're going to say use this middleware. Stick this in there somewhere in the middle. And so what's going to happen is it's going to try to pull a token out of the headers, the authorization token. It's going to split it by space because it has bearer space and it's got the authorization token and stuff like that. So we're going to say, get that token out of there. If there is a token, if there's not, then just continue on because there's no token. What are you going to do? But if there is a token, we're going to say, try to add the user to the context. So here's the HTTP context. It's the context of the request that's coming in. It's got all kinds of stateful information in it. We're going to say add the user. And that user is going to be part of this auth service. And this auth service will do a couple of things. It's going to use a JWT security token handler .validate token. So it's going to validate the token coming in, and it's going to try to validate it based on this security key. Like I said, this is just for a template. I'm not saying use this for your production stuff at Netflix or whatever the case is. But I'm not going to be validating a lot of stuff right now, just the token. And I'm going to be returning that validated token that will have claims on it. So we've got that part in there. On the other hand, when people authorize and they send their username and password, which will be in a login controller, all it's going to do is it's going to take the username and password. It's going to pass in the username and password to this authorize. It's going to try to get the user based on the username and password, which for now just make sure it's not null. Again, you're not using this in Netflix. This is just a placeholder template. So if it's not null, we're going to create a new found user. And if that's not null, if it is null, then we're just going to return back the auth. Nothing happened with the auth. We're not going to authorize anything. Task.from result string.empty. There's no token. There's no anything for you. But if it does come back with the user successfully from a username and password, then we're going to create a security token, a JWT security token. It's going to have a name with a username, and it's going to have this signing credential with this security key. The security key is just a security key that is encoded with this secret, and it should be configurable. We're not there yet. So we have login and we have validation. And so login. I think if I go ahead and run this, we can show an example of how it results. Okay. I hadn't shown another part here. We're going to go ahead and require authorization for this endpoint also. Okay. Let's start with the Swagger UI. So I try to go to Swagger, and what it's going to do here, I'll show you what happened right there. It's actually pretty neat. So we told Swagger to use this middleware. We're going to use this middleware, and again, even though we put these in this order, it's sort of random, but we're going to essentially say use this middleware. And this middleware is saying, if there's an auth header for authorization in there, then go ahead and do the authorization. But there's not the first time we come through here. So what we do is we add the headers www authenticate to basic and return the status code unauthorized. And what that does is it tells the browser, hey browser, this requires authentication, basic authentication, and since it's basic authentication, then the browser will say, oh, well, I can ask them that. I can ask them for basic credentials. That's really easy. And we click sign in. And then when it refreshes after the browser does that, then it will have the result of that basic authentication. And it will come in here and it'll be able to go through this. And so what this does at that point is bam, bam, bam. It'll be able to get the username and password. It'll decode them. So there's the username, there's the password. The username was ASDF, the password was ASDF, you guessed it. And then it'll use that auth service that we went through to authorize the JWT with that username and that password. And of course it will pass because it's just checking if it's not null. And now it will continue on to the next middleware. There we go. Cool. So now that we're here, what we can do is we can actually, let's just show what happens whenever we try to call this. Oh, we've got documentation in here too now. So currently returns just a hard-coded list of fruits, which is what it says here. Currently returns just a hard-coded list of fruits. And here's some remarks. You can actually put remarks in here also with 4 spaces for test code. And that looks like this. Remarks, line spacing, test code. So you've got documentation, you've got remarks, and we should be able to say try it out, execute. And execute will say unauthorized. But what we can do is log in. Get a token. I'm not saying that you have to use that way to log in, but that's just a get that I have set up. We tell it this is the token that we want you to pass along to all of the calls that you make. And then we can say execute, and it'll work because it passed that token along. And the reason it requires it is because we said require that authorization. So we say it's an HTTP GET, and also this attribute right here, require authorization. This just overrides attribute. It's called the gen authorized attribute. Just some authorization filter is the most important part. So it has on authorization. So any endpoint that has this authorization filter attribute on it will come through this on authorization. It tries to grab the user out of the HTTP context, and if you remember, we have it setting that user whenever it goes through that middleware. So it goes through the middleware, it builds the JWT, and it sets the user in there. So we're already past that when we get to the endpoint. The endpoint's sort of the end of the road here. So we've gotten to the endpoint, and then it checks out this attribute. It grabs the user, and if there is a user, this isn't production authorization yet. We're going to get to that in a future video. But if there is a user, then what it does is it says context.result is, if it's null. If there is no user, then it sets the result. When you set the result in any of these attributes or filters, authorization filters or any filters that you're sending to ASP.NET, whenever you set the result, that essentially tells it, oh, we already have a result. Don't go into their endpoint. And since I set the result to unauthorized, that's what it'll return is unauthorized. But since there is a user, it will not do that. It will fall through and exit and say, well, there's no result. Let's jump into the here. And that's exactly what it does. So go here, and it gives us back our fruits. All right, we've got auth. I skip over a lot of this stuff in the service core for the telemetry and the auth, because that's stuff that we're going to abstract, because every single API that is made in this fake company in the future is going to need cross-cutting concerns. And we're going to have an architect, a software architect, or a lead engineer implementing these cross-cutting concerns. And these are just placeholders for right now. So our endpoint works. I'm going to remove the authorize right now from this endpoint, because I was just showing it as a test. The important thing is that if we were to ever push this to production and we want to expose Swagger, Swagger now has the ability to be authorized so that anyone can't just look at it whenever they want. So let's say add authentication authorization. This is a pretty big PR, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this a little bit. Fruit controller, we added some comments. We said produces application/JSON, which I said I'm on the fence about if it's even required. Why care about authorizing Swagger? Part of the part that I sort of blew by fairly quickly is that if you decide to make Swagger your main form of what's it called, documentation, pull this up, then you're no longer going to want to do it in development. If it just is in development or just for QA or non-production environments, then you don't need to authorize it. But if you're going to be exposing Swagger and all of your endpoints, then to just the world, like hey world, go ahead and look at our Swagger, then that could give them more power than they need. So having somebody who has to be authorized to use this API to begin with in order to look at it is a good idea. Of course, you don't have to. If this isn't a super secure API, which a Fruit API probably isn't a super secure API, and it's just a public API and you really don't care who's hitting it or who's looking at it, then just expose it to everyone. But if it is something like for placing orders or payment information or something like that, then you really only want the people who are authorized to use this API to be able to see the documentation of the API. Could be security by obscurity. And another thing that I said is there's more to it than just adding this. That's something I said earlier. I'm not sure. Yeah, you were here, Floyd. It does not take away the requirement of the developers to do things like saying don't document this API and things like that. Like there's other things that you want to be doing. I'm not saying just obscure this thing out a little bit and then everything's better. There's a lot of other things that you want to go into. This is just phase one, and it gets auth into our project as a cross-cutting concern that we can then abstract out later. Okay. Cool. All right, so Fruit controller, we just add some documentation and logging. We added the JWT middleware. We added the Swagger auth middleware. Fruit DTO. Oh, for the Fruit DTO, I think it's just renamed something different, but we've got the documentation on the Fruit DTO also, which I can show as Fruit DTO. Represents a fruit and its calories. It's got some additional information in here now, now that we have the XML documentation going to Swagger. We've added these services, which I don't want to go into them too much. And program.cs. We've added the configurations for Swagger to do the authorization. And this part is different from the authorizing you to get to Swagger. That part adds this authorize button, which allows you to input your bearer token, and then that bearer token can be sent along to your endpoint API calls. And I think that's pretty much it for an hour-long walkthrough. Let me go ahead and, of course, commit this. Bam, bam, commit all. And I will also I've got, of course, the Git that you guys will be able to look at here in a little bit. Git push set upstream origin master. And you guys should be able to look at that here in a little bit. And I got to put my credentials in, which I don't want to do on stream. So yeah, thanks for stopping by. I'm going to open up a Google Meet, and I will post it inside of the OKC# user group channel. And you guys can jump on there and chat with me about the ideas, the principles, any of the steps that I went through. And I look forward to chatting with you. Thanks, guys.